All right, good morning, good evening, everyone. Kung saan kayo sa mundo ngayon, thank you very much for joining us for this latest episode. As I promised, eto na, pag-usapan natin ng mga issues na we discussed more in generic terms in past episode. As you remember, dun sa episode natin, including with former Senator Trillanes, we discussed the issue of AFP modernization. I also had a number of pieces recently dun sa itong $36 billion over 10 years AFP modernization program. But as they say, and like amateurs discuss strategy, experts discuss logistics, or something like that. So in that regard, I thought of a perfect person who we also had on our podcast in the past, and of course also I had the pleasure of also having him on my own television programs, the Signal TV, TV5. Thank you very much, Professor Ong, Admiral Ong, for joining us.
Good evening, Richard. Good morning here in Manila.
Good morning. Ito na. Okay, let's get the ball rolling. Yeah, I mean, first of all, what is your general impressions of itong announcement na we're gonna put aside, 2 trillion pesos over the next 10 years? Or at least that's the plan, for third horizon. In fact, I think the term they're using is re-horizon 3. Pagdating sa revised AFP modernization, which former President, the late President Aquino commenced more than a decade ago. What is the good, the bad, and ugly, if I can put it that way? Or what are your general impressions about it first, Admiral, before we go into the details?
Okay, number one, the good side of it is finally we have, it's a manifestation of commitment of the national government to support the modernization of armed forces of the Philippines. It's been a long time forthcoming. We have a lot of things to catch up in terms of capabilities. Not naman a negative side, but some things that need to be, we have to cross the T's in some areas. We need to also look at yung alignment between the modernization program and yung strategy natin to address various concerns. Not only West Philippine Sea, kasi as well as other security concerns. The second aspect of that is yung force structure, your organization.
Right.
Kasi you might be organized like for the Napoleonic Wars, for linear warfare, but you're already introducing equipment that, like that example, the machine gun, right, that is actually the solution against linear warfare. So parang logistics or equipment should be aligned with strategy and organization as
well. So that's the good part. Are there things that, hindi naman bad, kasi it's still early pa, pero meron bang mga bagay dyan, Professor Ong, in terms of, are there areas of concern, or are there areas that you want to see more details and clarifications from our officials?
Well, not exactly details, no, but my concern is the supply chain issue. Okay? For example, you're gonna buy a printer. Tapos, when you bought a printer, you only plan for 1 or 2 sets of the cartridges, okay, for it. Then you need to look at yung supply of cartridges. In this case, when you buy the equipment, you have to look at yung logistics train to support that in terms of sustainability. Okay? More particularly, if you're buying high-end type of equipment na merong maintenance intensive, okay, and requires training not only personnel but actually adhering to yung maintenance cycle religiously. So, this one. Pangalawa, and this is arising from yung observations natin from the Ukraine-Russian conflict. Tapos yung what's happening now in the Red Sea, and also yung Israeli-Hamas conflict. Is while we go for sophisticated weapon system, there is value to looking at asymmetric and cheaper weapon system. Kasi in terms of sustainability, mas madali. And we cannot rely on the current business model that we buy it from abroad. If we opt for less sophisticated, cheaper but effective weapon system, we need to look at developing them in country rather than buying them from abroad. So that takes care of the supply chain issue that I was talking about earlier. And
right, please go ahead.
We need to rethink yung solutions natin to tactical or strategic problems. For example, in Ukraine, they were able to actually contain yung Russian Black Sea Fleet with the non-existent Ukrainian Navy, using primarily land-based defense systems. Okay, so that's an asymmetric solution to a problem, which is the Russian Black Sea Fleet. So we need to think in those terms. We need to think asymmetrically when we look at yung mga tactical problems that confronting us here in the West Philippine Sea and other security concerns.
Right. I mean, there's a lot that we can go to, and we can talk from the Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict in the Caucasus all the way to Ukraine conflict, especially in the Black Sea, and then what's happening in Houthi, Red Sea, among others. But before we go more into detail, as far as drone warfare and all sorts of asymmetric warfare is concerned, balikan natin itong mga conventional capabilities that we're looking at developing in the coming years. Of course, isa dyan yung mention ng, of course, your Navy po yung background nyo, Admiral. Submarines. Talking about 2 to 3 submarines, I mean, I heard some regional specialist or commentator saying that 3 is the magic number. In fact, I think the South China Morning Post in Hong Kong had a piece on that actually 3 may look very few on the paper, but it could give us the kind of flexibility and operational capabilities that could be potentially even game changer down the road. But obviously, this is very much 10 years, 15 years from now. But first of all, what is your thought about 3 submarines? Not only 1, not only 2, but 3 submarines. If last time I checked, Vietnam has 6 kilo-class submarines, the more modern versions they got from Russia. Malaysia has it. If I'm not mistaken, even Myanmar has submarines. Isn't it time for the Philippines to have submarines? And is 3 the magic number?
Yeah, I would agree. 3 would be the magic number. No, even now, currently, the Navy, the Philippine Navy uses the 3 concept. Okay, so normally it's 1 is up, 1 is under training, 1 is under maintenance. So that's that's the minimum. Okay, but of course, minsan increase yan to 6 or to 9. So multiples of 3. Okay, so 3 is the basic. 1 up, 1 on training, and 1 down.
Now, in terms of the submarines, a number of countries have come forward. France, of course, at least on the surface, looks like one of the leading candidates here. We also have South Korea, which has already been a major provider to us in terms of naval capabilities. Spain, España, I think, offered to even build yung naval base somewhere in the Visayas region, I think, if I'm not mistaken. May mga nachismis sa akin dito sa Washington DC na may mga kaibigan natin. Maybe the Italians may also come out of nowhere. I mean, of course, you're not part of the bidding commission and all, and I'm not asking you to weigh the scales and all of that, but put your thumb, on the scales. But what is your sense with all of these different options coming in? I mean, at least on the surface, what do you feel about it?
Okay, siguro before I answer that, I backtrack muna natin why a submarine. Kasi
ayaw nga pala, no? We just said bakit magic number 3, pero we didn't explain why submarines. Good.
Because there's a current discourse on them. There's the other side that are actually criticizing that.
Of course, yeah.
That project, okay, masyado expensive. Okay. When we went to do this, yung discourse on do we acquire a submarine, tinrain namin yung problem sa ang major challenge natin sa South China Sea is the PLA Navy surface fleet. Okay, we're talking about the destroyers, the frigates, and corvettes nila.
Right,
And it's
right.
the preponderance of surface forces in the South China Sea. Okay? Wag na natin isama yung ano rito, yung Chinese Coast Guard saka yung militia. Kasi that in itself also already complicates the situation in terms of numbers.
Right.
Okay? So the solution namin is asymmetric. We cannot confront a surface fleet that is superior to us in number and capability with an equally surface fleet then. Okay? For one, we do not have the industrial capacity that China has. Yung shipbuilding capability niya. We don't, even the US has problems. Okay, to match that. So, parang symmetric solution will not work. So, we want opted for asymmetric. So, dalawa yun actually sa solutions namin.
Sorry, Admiral, for the purpose of our audience, when we say symmetric, meaning head-to-head, no? I mean, like on a conventional basis,
Equal,
ship to ship.
Equal capability. So, kung barko yun siya, barko rin sa'yo.
Right. And when you say asymmetric is not necessarily one-to-one correspondence, but actually you can still match it, kind of jiu-jitsu your way through it. I mean, we're just trying to explain to folks who are not into the defense lingo and all of that,
Okay, so So, yung dalawa yung solution sa amin doon. One of them is the BrahMos anti-shipping system, which is for delivery na. The second one is submarine, which is still under contention in terms of actually acquiring it. Now, moving forward, yung question mo, which is the better alternative. Now, when we frame the acquisition, ang ano namin dito is, this is not a Navy project. This is not even an AFP project. This should be framed as a national project. And when we do that, we're not just buying the submarine, whether that's 2 or 3.
Right.
We're buying a capability, but also yung industrial ecosystem to support that. Okay? Kaya when we are into negotiation, ang ano namin is, ano yung in terms of what do you add to the basket of goodies, baga. So we're asking for technology transfer.
Package, no? Package deal,
Yung package na. We're looking at, kasi we need to link up with private sector. Kasi private sector will be the recipient of the industrial component of the this engagement. Then we were also considering, we will also look in negotiations, we also ask for, can you help us improve our STEM education in specific schools? Yung science, technology, engineering, math. Kasi you need yung manpower part, you need those manpower, number one, to support the industrial base, and later in the future, sila yung mag-ooperate ng submarine.
Right.
Kasi you cannot employ or use people na yung training niya or yung academic back yung industrial capacity is the human way also to support that entire ecosystem, to support the submarine.
Yung human capital to operate the hardware. Admiral, aside from the human capital to operate it, of course, there's also discussion of kind of a overarching strategy or grand strategy. What is the broader grand strategy that you think the Philippine defense establishment has to develop in terms of armed forces of the Philippines? You know, I mean, we can talk about the military industrial complex. We can talk about people who are running it, but there should be also kind of an overarching strategy, right? If you're going to build a formidable or decent navy, at least for a mid-sized country like the Philippines.
Well, the Navy has worked on an archipelagic defense strategy before, and the Marine Corps independently has developed its own archipelagic coastal defense strategy. So
can you explain this to again? Sorry, Admiral. Again, our audience is not folks like us. Our audience is just like folks who are not necessarily here for defense issues. Perhaps they're here for political issues or marites or I don't know, glutathione. So for the purpose of our audience, can we explain what do we mean by archipelagic defense or coastal defense strategy? Simple lang natin para sa ating audience. Yeah.
Well, in plain language, ang Pilipinas is made up is an archipelago.
Mm-hmm.
So we are made up of 7,100 islands, low tide. Okay, so we need to defend all of those islands within the archipelago natin. Because of the unique nature of an archipelago, meaning multiple islands dispersed and different ingress, egress, o maraming daungan papasok.
Yeah.
Okay? For the Philippines alone, we have 7 archipelagic straits that we need to secure and defend. Okay? So, yun yung nature ng archipelago. So that means, yung strategy mo o yung konsepto mo para depensahan yung archipelago mo should fit the nature of the country natin. Meaning, you have to consider na marami tayong island groups, maraming entrance o access ways inside, into, and out of the Philippine archipelago. So, yung strategy natin must be able to look at how do you now defend the archipelago natin.
Okay, now that we have clarified some of these basic terms, yung archipelagic defense or coastal defense capabilities, so balikan natin ito in terms of conventional capability development. I mean, is there like is there a sequencing here? Is there a kind of like, I don't know if you can sandwich it, like a little bit of this, a little bit of that? Can you lasagna it? Like what is the optimal mix of capabilities we're looking at, given the limitations of our budget and given the time frame we're looking at and given the urgency of the threats that we're facing? I mean, again, if you were to make up a menu, right, like parang mga war simulation, right, you were given 10 points. How are you going to divide it among certain capability development, like 1 point here, 2 points here, 1 point here? What would be the reasonable kind of mixture for you, Admiral?
Well, if resource is an issue, meaning your budget is an issue.
Well, your budget is 2 trillion pesos over 10 years, right? So, yeah. So roughly 200 billion a year, something like that, right? Yeah. $3 to $4 billion a year, let's say.
Okay, ang challenge na yun is, and I haven't seen the list ng Horizon, so we're actually basically speculating it. But whatever is on that list, the question now is, yung capabilities that you're trying to acquire, will it address the immediate challenges or threats sa archipelago mo? Okay. So I mentioned yung on the part of the Navy, ang existential challenge sa amin 2016, and I think it's still existential challenge even now, is the PLA Navy Surface Fleet. Okay. Kasi yun yung driver ng strategy ng China sa South China Sea. Okay. So, to deal with that, we have considered yung anti-ship missile system, we have considered yung submarine, okay? As yung flagship weapons mo to address the threat. But yung mid-level threat, yung Chinese Coast Guard and yung militia, using an anti-ship missile system is an expensive proposition. Kumbaga, yung return for investment, para bang gumamit ka ng certain weapon system tapos ang target mo bangka.
Yeah.
Okay. You will obliterate it.
Yeah,
but the question is that's not the way to do business in terms of ROI. Okay. You're wasting resources. So we need to look at yung mid-level threat at saka yung low-level threat. For example, yung militia. Ang nakalimutan kasi natin, we look at the militia, yung fishing vessels, tagaharang at taga-blockade ng Coast Guard natin tsaka ng supply boat. But remember, these platforms are, yung design niya can be used for mine warfare. Pwede sila magdala ng naval mines, and i-lay out yan doon sa ating coastal waters o doon sa, let's say, mouth of Manila Bay or Subic Bay. They can be used for surveillance. And I think the larger militia vessels can accommodate yung lighter or smaller missile systems. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, may force multiplier to. So, yung low end na yun, I think the appropriate weapon system would be drones. Okay? Para ma-address yung problema na yun. And we need kumbaga, expendable drones to address the threat. So, that's one. Now, we also need to look at how do we defend yung islands natin. Okay. If you go back to World War II, some of our islands were isolated kasi binaypass naman sila ng Japanese forces. They were isolated. Until binalikan na lang sila nung nag-consolidate na yung forces nila ng Japan sa Pilipinas. So, we need to design yung defense system ng islands natin as stand-alone. They can operate independently. Kasi unang magbe-breakdown sa'yo dyan, communications eh. Okay? You must assume that your communications will break down. That will be the first thing na sisira, na
targetin ng kalaban. No? Yeah.
So you must design yung homeland defense mo for low-tech warfare. Low-tech warfare siya. Kasi the more low-tech yung warfare mo, the more resilient yun. Okay? Kasi if you go for sophisticated web systems, whether it's weapons or support systems, doon naman nag-ooperate yung natin yung mga adversaries natin. Okay? So it's better to look for ways in this. Kung kailangan na, we go back to Morse code tsaka ham radio. Okay? As a backup system. Just to ensure that yung homeland defense will continue, will persevere, even in a non-permissive environment. Okay?
So
then,
yes, please, Admiral, go ahead. Yeah.
Kasi we're talking of the physical side, whether yung sa ere, sa dagat, o sa lupa. But yung non-physical should also be considered. So yung cyber, maraming pa tayong kailangan gawin para to be able to say na we are confident in defending our cyberspace. Kasi right now, my personal view is private sector is the one taking the cudgels in terms of defending yung private sector. Okay? And government is still in that level of trying to step up to the challenge. The second one is yung public opinion is also a battle space. And alam mo naman yan, Richard, meron tayong information war ongoing right now. Meron tayong counter.
I have no idea. I'm totally shocked. I've never seen any pro-China makapili club around. Yeah.
So that's also part of warfare. Okay? And
cognitive
I think
warfare.
we've been good at it, in countering it, but who knows?
Don't be complacent. Yeah. No room for complacency dito sa cognitive warfare nila. Yeah. Admiral, again, before we go to the asymmetric and cyber, I think those stones are definitely important. Thank you for pointing them out. Ang point ko lang kasi may plano talaga magkaroon ng acquisition sa mga conventional capabilities. So a few submarines, multi-role fighter jets, perhaps more of supersonic missile systems, if not hypersonic. Like, I completely get your point. Now, we have to go for highest ROI, for what we can develop in the shortest possible time, what we can maintain. But what do you think is the minimum level of conventional arms acquisition that we have to go for? Like, 3 submarines looks like reasonable to you, right? I know this is your Navy, but in terms of fighter jets capabilities, are we looking at 2 or 3 squadrons? Realistically, what kind of multi-role vessels are we looking at as most reasonable, given you're facing a country like China, which has, I think, 2 5th-generation developed fighter jets programs already? So when one of the largest, so what are we looking at in terms of the minimum conventional capabilities we should have before putting a bigger part of our eggs perhaps in the basket of asymmetric and cyber warfare and all?
Okay, so I'll defer to the Air Force in terms of number of squadrons. I think they tapped it to 3 squadrons. I will look at it, ano yung mission na gusto mo i-perform. Okay, so historically the Air Force, because of yung counterinsurgency campaign natin, ang primary mission niya was close air support. Supporting the army or the infantry in counterinsurgency operations. That has been its principal role for the past few decades. Now, I think the Air Force, if they want to go conventional, in terms of conventional terms, they are looking into air defense. Okay, that means they need to establish the ability to protect yung PADIS natin, yung Philippine Air Defense Interdiction Zone. Okay, so you need fighters, air superiority capability. Okay? So maaaring yung tinitingnan nila. Ang ating concern naman is ganun pa rin, yung PLA Navy Surface Fleet. So if I were to ask the Air Force, I would ask them, can you also consider the ability of your multi-role aircraft to carry anti-ship missile systems? Kasi that will give us more ability to actually counter yung surface fleet nila. Okay. So that's what I'm going to ask a Navy person na sana one of the squadrons will be designed as naval strike for naval strike requirements. Okay. For air defense naman, it's not that we're talking at merong guns versus missile dichotomy.
Yeah, guns and butter, or you mean trade-off?
Guns versus missile in terms of yung air defense.
Mm-hmm.
Kasi missiles are expensive. Okay? But I think one of the lessons, again, from the Ukraine-Russian conflict was they've used an older German anti-air defense system, which is gun type. Okay? And I'm tying this up to yung discussion ko earlier about supply chain. Kasi mas madali yung supply chain mo kung bala yung pinaka-primary munition mo compared to missile, which is more expensive. So maybe consider a mix, if not possible.
Mix, yeah.
Because a purely missile-based air defense system might be too expensive for us.
Right. So may konting old school style, ganun Rambo style. May konting Rambo, medyo may konting high-tech tayo.
But there are I think Turkey is one. There are providers of gun type air defense system.
Yeah.
Na modern na, hindi yung
Rambo.
Definitely.
Si Rambo ang naisip ko, nakaganyan siya. Ratetan yung mga... Okay, what about yung mga systems like HIMARS or the Javelin missile? Some of these things that many thought could be game changers. At least we saw in the initial phase of the invasion of Russia how some of the systems were very effective. What is your take on those issues? More army yatas yun to. This is more in the realm of army siguro na pag HIMARS and all.
I think HIMARS is a current conversation between our armed forces natin and the US forces. But yung HIMARS na alam natin is for land warfare.
Right.
Okay. I'm not sure kung na-perfect na nila yung HIMARS na pwede gamitin for maritime environment. But if there is, I think that would be a good acquisition as well. Kasi we need to balance off yung BrahMos natin at the ship missile system is, I think our range is around 290 kilometers. Okay? So that takes care of our exclusive economic zone. But for shorter ranges, you need a shorter range weapon system. So I think the HIMARS
is a good option, right?
Or a similar system with similar capabilities would fill up that gap.
Now, I think we kind of covered some of the conventional part. Although, I know you're more a Navy guy, so sorry kung I put you on the spot, Admiral, on the Air Force part. Although we are all following what's happening with the Air Force. Some are saying within days we may have some sort of a confirmation whether we're going to go for Gripen with Sweden over the F-16 from the United States. I think this will later on bring us to the more serious, just a serious conversation about U.S.-Philippine alliance, especially as I speak to you now from Washington, D.C. But before going there, dito sa U.S.-Philippine alliance, partnerships, etc., let's talk about the asymmetric part a little bit more. Let me push things a little bit. I mean, do you think it makes sense for the Philippines also to have not only, suicide drones, autonomous suicide boats, yung mga ganyan na ginagamit ng some of the forces in the Middle East, for instance, as a kind of a deterrent and potential weapons against the U.S. if things go down the road, go downhill all the way. But also in terms of, pwede rin tayo mag-develop ng mga militias natin, put some of our feistier Filipino people there. What are we looking at here? Because obviously there's always this escalation domination, right? If we have, for every 100 drones we can deploy, I think the Chinese can deploy 1 million drones or something. You get what I'm saying? It's not like China is not a master of asymmetrical warfare itself. In a way, we're saying let's do to China what China wants to do to the US, right? Their developments of ACBMs, their developments of all these drone systems. What are we looking at here? Do you think that the Philippines should also develop its own drone industry? I think Ukraine has done a pretty good job of going from zero to something, not maybe hero yet, but Realistically, in terms of, kasi supply chain yung pinag-usapan natin, do you think the Philippines is also in position to develop its own drone and some of the asymmetric capability development industry, assuming we can get the semiconductors and all from Taiwan and other countries? Yeah.
Well, I would agree dun sa proposal na to build our own drones dito sa Pilipinas. No? But yung context niya is dapat we already have yung ecosystem niya would be the Self-Reliance Defense Program, SRDP. Dapat ilatag niyo yun because there are some legal things that you need to undertake first para that can be a viable. Ano? So we're not only talking of drones, no? We're talking of how do we create a viable defense industry in the Philippines to support its own requirements. But in our conversation with my colleagues about defense industry kasi, you cannot develop that type of industry na ang market mo is armed forces lang. Hindi pwedeng Pilipinas lang. If you are going to pursue that type of industry, you need to think global.
Yeah.
You need to think of a global market or at least a regional market. Kasi kung hindi siya viable.
The economies of scale. You mean the economies of scale? You have to produce at a certain scale with certain market. Otherwise, your margin small is too thin to make it viable. Yeah.
Correct. The point is, government or the armed forces should not be in the business of conducting business. Okay?
Right.
We should let private sector perform this function. But for private sector to have a buy-in on this type of activity, it must be profitable. So the ecosystem, the legal and the industrial ecosystem for that must be ilatag mo muna. Then we can talk about setting up a drone factory in the Philippines. Whether that is for maritime or land or air. Then naiayos mo na yun, ilatag mo na maayos.
Right. Interestingly, just the other week there was a delegation of more than 20 Indian companies that visited the Philippines, and per the Indian ambassador, what the Indian companies are looking at is not just making us their latest third world client, but they're looking at joint ventures. They're looking at giving us even soft loans and all to kind of develop also our industry, in terms of development of armored vehicles, who knows, maybe drones, some of these things. What do you think about that? Do you think maybe that's the way forward, that we have joint ventures? I think Indonesia, for instance, has a joint fifth generation fighter program with South Korea, right? Do you think that's kind of the way forward? Kasi medyo behind the curve tayo, but at the same time, we're a mid-sized economy, a fast-growing economy. I think we can do better than just buying from different countries, right? But maybe joint ventures with some of the mid-level countries like India, or more than mid-level like South Korea is perhaps the way forward?
Yes, joint venture and tech transfer goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
And of course, babalik tayo yung conversation natin earlier, yung foundation yun. Ang foundation muna would be for tech transfer to take place, you also need to develop yung industrial capacity. And of course, yung STEM, yung humanware mo. Okay? Now, ang kagandahan dito, yung sa Indonesia naman, actually nakakalungkot yun. Kasi the Air Force is buying aircraft from Indonesia. Okay?
Yung mga trainer, yung trainer, yeah.
Yeah, no, transport, light transport.
Oh, yeah, even the light transport. Not to mention yung mga barko din natin na kukuha natin sa kanila, di ba? Yeah.
But yung industry nila yun, pinag-aaralan nila yung corporation natin dito sa Pilipinas. Binalik nila sa Indonesia. They made good with running that concept. Right. Sa atin naman, nag-fold up. Hindi nag-prosper yun. Okay, parang yung same situation na siyang Erie, yung rice.
Yes, the rice. Vietnam, Thailand learning from us and then selling back to
they learn from us.
Niluto tayo sa sarili natin mantika.
Okay. Yeah. Yung sa Indonesia naman, yung shipyard, I think quality-wise, we're better than them in terms of quality. But they're just better in terms of yung running that industry. And hindi ko alam, there are some factors here that actually that prevents us from progressing.
I mean, Admiral, as my understanding of Indonesia is that they have a number of large state-owned, state-backed enterprises involved in the production of advanced weapon systems, which President Jokowi discussed when he visited Manila. Nun. I mean, I'm not sure if the Philippines is in that position, but in terms of our private sector, are there particular, puro mga oligarchs yan. For the lack of a better term, are there oligarchs there in the Philippines that you think could be a positive contributor here? I mean, in India, it's Tata, right? The Tata company is involved in everything, car production. I mean, pretty modernized yung mga some of the, quote-unquote oligarchs ng India. Do you think we can have a version of that? I mean, my understanding is like Ayala, for instance, getting into electric bike production. There are also discussion joint venture with EV companies and EV production. Are there anyone on the horizon, or is this just a wish list or something? Wishful thinking.
Anyway, babalik tayo ron. It's not profitable. Nobody will undertake that activity. Now, there was a time na when we were looking at yung getting two more amphibious vessels, yung second tranche ng Tarlac class LPD.
Right.
And DND was trying to look at the idea of having a joint venture na tapos dito gagawin sa Pilipinas yung second tranche na acquisition na instead of sa Indonesia or sa South Korea. But ang learning namin doon was yung current capacity ng ating shipyards sa Pilipinas cannot absorb transfer of technology yet. So marami pa kailangan gagawin ng work para doon. It's not as simple as joint venture din gagawin na dito.
Right.
So we go back to industrial capacity at human wear aspect.
Yeah.
Of for us to go into serious undertaking such as building that, no? Ngayon, one way of yung problem of profitability is if national government will be the customer. For example, kasi most of our passenger vessels, commercial vessels, are second-hand. I think they get it from Japan. It's much cheaper than having it built here. But if national government would subsidize the project, compel or ask our local shipyards, local shipping companies, passenger and commercial, to get their vessels from our local shipyards. Of course, with government trying to put up.
So may guaranteed market ka, in a sense, guaranteed.
May guaranteed market ka, then government will put up parang soft loan. You can pay it in X number of years later.
Right.
Tapos, ang maganda ron, baka pwede, military specifications from passenger vessels sa commercial vessels.
Right.
Such that they can be used for disaster response, they can be used for troop transport, they can be used as floating hospitals. Kasi yung design niya, pagka-construct niya, is designed as if it is a military or naval vessel. Okay. Pero civilian companies are the one using it. So then they can be part of a larger auxiliary of our reserve force na later on, pag may emergency, sige, pahiram muna nung barko mo, ako bahala sa fuel niya, we'll just use it to transport troops. So we'll just need it kasi merong disaster response sa isang island. We need to convert yung to temporarily as a evacuation area or a hospital. So parang gano'n. So if national government is the guarantor, subsidizes the program, baka pwede.
Yeah, industrial policy. Yeah. Right. This is a military industrial policy, yeah. Or defense industrial policy, sorry, for that matter. I mean, are there like best practices we can look at? I mean, for instance, I've been following the case of India under Modi over the past decade. They have revised yung kanilang defense acquisition, procurement laws. They have focused more on developing their own domestic capacity. Kasi India has been one of the largest importer of defense equipment, diba? For a very long time. A lot of that from Russia and all, but now they're moving towards developing their own. What are the best practices from comparable countries? I mean, medyo masyadong advanced na in Japan and NATO countries, but yung mga other developing countries, or dati lang in developing countries like South Korea. I mean, I think we already discussed Indonesia to a certain degree. I mean, even Pakistan, diba? Yung mga mas mahirap pa ng bansa sa atin na nakaka-develop sila ng military-industrial complex. And and slightly more developed countries like Turkey, for instance, diba? Drone superpowers na sila. So, are there like kind of a, yun nga, parang, ayoko na ang dating dito suntok sa buwan, diba? At the same time, we don't want to be complacent or masyadong low ang standard. Kaya tinitingnan ko yung mga other middle-sized, middle-income countries, or rising developing countries like India, for instance, or Brazil. What are things that we can learn from them? No? Are there some best practices in mind?
Well, number one, there must be a plan. It must be part of an industrial plan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Babalik din naman
Otherwise,
tayo sa industrial,
it's good for 6 years lang, then wala na. Okay. Then there must be buy-in from all stakeholders doon. So it's not a political issue, but rather something that everybody can agree on. That it's something needs to be done, no matter who is in power. So kailangan depoliticize siya. Another one would be, again, I mentioned, we need to strengthen yung STEM natin, STEM education. Kasi we have this, but saan pupunta yung graduates ng STEM education natin? They're not staying here kasi wala kang walang catch system walang sasalo sa kanila when they graduate. So dito, may tie-up dapat yung STEM education infrastructure mo with yung labor force o yung market mo that will accept it.
Right.
So at some point, it needs to be a closed system. Kumbaga, sige, when you graduate, you come to me. Okay.
Yeah.
When you graduate, they say from Philippine Science High School. After that, you go to college, you take this course. Then after that, you are employed guaranteed. Dito. Okay. You can serve for X number of years later on. You want to go abroad, then that's up to you.
Parang mga scholarships, diba? May conditional. You get the scholarship, but 2 years you have to go back, something like that. Yeah.
So, you need those, kasi you need those base to work with.
Yeah.
Pangatlo, it must be profit-driven, of course. Okay. It's based on a realistic appreciation ng regional at global market. Merong patutunguhan yun. So you hindi mo kailangan patulan lahat ng types of equipment. Only those that will work for you. And it must be done at a much better and cheaper way. Okay. So you mentioned about South Korea. South Korea started off with tech transfer.
Right.
Tech transfer, I think, from Germany. And pinag-aralan nila yung technology. Reverse engineering nila yun. Okay. For us to reverse engineer, that means you have skilled persons who understand the system. Otherwise, superficial yung
Otherwise, may reverse pero walang engineering. Puro reverse lang.
Puro reverse lang.
Correct.
Then, kaya makita mo na, ano tawag na South Korean sa kanila ngayon?
Right.
What they call themselves. They are now the new arsenal of democracies.
Yeah. Especially,
Kasi,
medyo Trumpian yung president nila ngayon. So, may pagkaganyan. May mayabang.
No, they're now supplying Ukraine, EU countries.
Yeah. Poland. I think Poland is one of their biggest the customers, right? Yeah.
So, they're actually, yun yung tinasabi kong, they started with a local market, but kinapacitate nila para mag-compete sa global market.
Right. But do you think, how should I put it? I mean, again, South Korea, these countries are known for really proactive industrial policy, a la METI, Japan, and all of that. We can have a long conversation over that. Because there's some people that are asking questions here about, for instance, yung steel industry natin, how depressing things have turned. But I know the Gokong Ways, I think, are quite involved in the steel industry, and they're not doing too bad. I think there are 2 or 3 steel industry companies in the Philippines who have been defying all sorts of odds. Are we perhaps also underestimating our private sector's capability to engage in increasingly sophisticated and large-scale, manufacturing or industrial practices, including potentially defense industry practices down the road? Magaling sila sana paggawa ng condominium, paggawa ng kung ano-ano, di ba? But hopefully, you wanna move up the ladder, right? Value chain.
Kasi when you have an industrial base, merong supporting industries through factor of it. So example, shipbuilding. Of course, you mentioned about steel. But steel, ang niyan is nickel and ano pa rin yung components of steel. Okay. So, I'm not sure, no? What is the problem with... Ang problema, if you want to revive yung steel industry natin, I am guessing, no? I'm not expert on steel industry. Is parang it's much cheaper to get it from abroad rather than developing it locally. So I think that's a challenge. But if you're willing to offset yung kumbaga yung lugi mo, just to make sure that you build your own steel industry, well, again, that will take a national government.
Yeah, talagang kailangan mo ng guarantor dyan to a certain degree.
Premature. Kumbaga, never mind if it's more expensive, but your steel goes to my shipbuilding industry. Para everything is sourced locally. Okay? So you limit yung vulnerability mo ng supply chain mo. Okay? Like for example, you cannot produce this aircraft because yung chip nun is sourced from abroad.
Right.
So that becomes a supply chain vulnerability mo.
Thank you for that, Admiral. I mean, the reason I'm also asking this is I just want to also understand how you folks with background in Navy and naval sciences and marine engineering, etc., how you understand this issue of industrial policy. I mean, I had other guests talking about industrial policy, development, etc. So I just want to see where this is coming from. Now, balikan natin yung question ko ulit dun sa asymmetric before we go to the Philippine-US alliance. Do you think the Philippines should also develop its kind of militias a la China? Yung mga kunyaring fisherman. I mean, do you think we have to tapatan sila in their own game, or that's very dangerous because you're just giving them more excuse to escalate the situation and dominate it?
We tried that. It didn't work for us.
Yeah.
Iba yung it's a system issue. We don't have the same yung kumbaga the base that we need to work with is not the same as China. So hindi siya sustainable. For example, most of our major fishing companies do not actually fish in the South China Sea. Doon sila sa Pacific.
Yeah.
Doon sila nakadeploy. So it's not for us to divert them to South China Sea. That means we have to subsidize their operations here. Pangalawa, yung militia ng China, komunista nga sila eh. So kaya nilang i-press gang yung mga citizens nila.
Puppet master them. Yeah.
Okay. But hindi naman natin pwede ipilit yung ating mga fisher folks or those in the fishing community to perform militia duties. Okay? And of course, pag may nangyari yan, may compensation na. So you're now going to be an issue of how do you now fund yung personal services?
Auxiliary military army. Yeah.
So it gets complicated.
Now, can we go to the issue of the Philippine-US alliance? So we discussed joint ventures with other countries, best lessons we can get from other developing countries. Pero ang gusto kong pag-usapan dito, Admiral, is when it comes to after all, we're not alone, unlike Ukraine. Diba? Ukraine didn't have any kind of alliance and all of that. And let's be honest, the reason na tumulong ang West sa Ukraine is because they showed resolve. I think had the Ukrainians not shown resolve, tapos na ang usapan, wala pang 1 week, tapos na, diba? Na-decapitate na yung buong leadership nila. It's only when they realize may laban itong mga Ukrainians at lumalaban ng mga Ukrainians, they began to invest in them, right? So the West was not just throwing money out of nowhere or throwing money at a sinking hole. They were also assessing how far Ukrainians were willing to fight for that. And as we speak here, dito sa US Congress, malaking debate about should they continue with this. Now, speaking of that, when it comes to Philippine-US alliance, what do you think is the optimal, reasonable, and realistic division of labor dito? Kasi in terms of strike capabilities, diba? The Americans have that. Because, I was just talking to some folks here and, one of the conversation is, should the Philippines also develop counter-strike capability? The ability to hit yung mga base nila dyan sa Fiery Cross, dyan sa Sandy Cay, dun sa mga areas na inoccupy nila, to paralyze their ability to threaten us, diba? Parang diba? Parang sa boxing yan, if you have this range, you can counter-punch right away if they try to get near to you. Or should we just outsource this to the Americans in terms of the counter-strike capability and all, and then focus tayo dun sa proactive defense. I mean, what is the optimal balance we're looking at here in terms of division of labor? Should things go ugly really with China down the road?
Okay, there's such thing as deconflicting yung space. Okay, so
Right.
there's such thing as airspace management. There's also a need to also manage yung space in terms of
Para hindi kayo magbungguan. Yeah, parang...
hindi ka kasi kumbaga
Yeah.
pag lahat ng nasa kanan nitong linya, process namin yan.
Yeah.
Lahat ng sa kaliwa ng linya, sa inyo yan. So,
Right,
kumbaga,
right.
bahala na kayo lahat dyan. So, that's one way of looking at it. So, if we look at it in terms of managing battle space, pwede nating sabihin yung in terms of division of labor.
Right.
Anything outside of, let's say, the 12 nautical mile territorial waters natin, moving towards the South China Sea, sige, bahala na kayo dyan. We will focus on defending the archipelago. Yung archipelago. Okay. And our archipelagic strait. So that's one way to look at it. The second one, if you really want to develop an organic domestic capability, balik tayo ulit sa Ukraine-Russian conflict.
Right.
Okay. Ano ba yung ginawa ng Ukraine sa Sebastopol? Yung naval base ng Russia doon. Okay. They use drones. So yung counter-strike capability nila, they use also drones for that.
Which is
if you look
cheap,
at it-
which is affordable, right?
Cheaper, no? Cheaper.
Yeah.
So for example, sa Spratlys Group of Islands, 3 lang naman yung major bases nila dyan eh. Fiery Cross, sa Mischief, tsaka yung sa forgot the other one, na may harbor. And we can, let's say for example, sa Pag-asa, we can redeploy drones there. Okay? Doon sa Ayungin Shoal, the much contested Ayungin Shoal, we can deploy drones there. Okay, itong drones natin dito sa Ayungin, ang target niya palagi is Chip Creek. Kasi konting distansya na lang,
Right.
pwede ka na dun eh. Okay. So, pwedeng ganun if you want to develop counter-strike capability. But, ang ano kasi, militarily, yung occupied isles and feature nila to is not defensible. We are in the same boat as practice eh. Even our features, of course, obviously, are not defensible militarily. So, they are more of a political statement. Ito yung muhon natin na nilagay because we're saying that is part of our real estate. Okay? And I'm gonna put this muhon there para to show na amin yan. We're claiming that.
Right.
So yung troops natin tsaka yung facilities natin doon are muhon. But if you're saying employing them or defending them militarily, of course, medyo that's a different proposition altogether.
Speaking of the Philippine-U.S. alliance, I mean, how should I put it? I mean, as we speak, they're talking about, I don't know, how many billions of dollars, 50, 40 billions given to Ukraine. I understand the situation in Ukraine. And then you're talking about, of course, the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. Well, in this case, you're talking about the U.S. ally, which is one of the most advanced countries on earth, especially in military terms. So the question here is, shouldn't the U.S. actually step it up a little bit, considering the Philippines is up against someone like China? Don't you think that, of course, I'm not drawing an exact parallel with Ukraine, but I mean, just look at how far the Philippine Coast Guard, the Philippine Navy has gone in terms of pushing back against China, in terms of standing its ground dun sa situations sa Second Thomas Shoal. Don't you think we have shown enough resolve and seriousness and reliability to make the Americans think now we're also worth investing in? Although, of course, thank God we're not in a total war situation like what Ukraine is. But clearly, there's that dynamic, right? They're going to invest in you if they see you're willing to fight for yourself. I mean, you cannot be holier, more Catholic than the Pope, right? I mean, they cannot fight it more. Because I remember this very well, Admiral. There was an American admiral. I gave a talk here in Washington, D.C. a few years ago. And we were talking about Scarborough, blah, blah, blah. And then, sabi niya, we cannot want to fight more for Panatag Shoal or Scarborough Shoal than your president. We're talking about, of course, Mr. Jetski, di ba? You know, when you have a Filipino president saying, wala tayong magagawa, sabi ng Amerikano, edi, yun pala eh. Kung wala magagawa, ba't kayo umaasa sa amin na poprotektahan kayo? Eh, kayo na nga, hindi kayo lumalaban para sa sarili nyo. Well, at least, thank God, we don't have that kind of president anymore or leadership. But, you get what I'm saying, right? I mean, this is this is where I disagree with folks who say, salamat kay Digong, siniseryoso tayo na America. But there was a lot of cost to having Digong around, right? He made us look like a banana republic. There was a lot of delay in terms of developing bilateral capabilities. And I would argue, kahit siguro bakanteng chair ang nilagay mo sa Malacanang, the US has no choice but to take us more seriously because of our geography and the situation with China, right? Regardless of, this is really about our geopolitical position, right? But then again, I mean, should we push more for the Americans? I mean, we're talking about tens of billions of dollars given to some countries that have already one of the most advanced militaries in the world and are up against, I don't know, some terrorist organization here and there. Well, in the case of Philippines, we're up against the biggest navy on earth. I just see some asymmetry in a bad sense there, right? I mean, or am I expecting too much? I mean, how should we put it?
Okay, number one, and I may get into trouble, no, kasi in another program I mentioned, I said, let's not rely too much on the Americans. I think, number one, we need to look at yung sarili mo na natin. Kasi if you're not willing to fight for your own country, how can you expect other countries to fight for you?
Sure.
So basic yun eh. If you are not able to defend your national interests, don't ask the Americans to fight for us. Kasi parang that's ridiculous eh. But hindi natin control yung and you're there in Washington, D.C. And I think you're at the heart of a very controversial debate about where the money should go. Kasi ang conversation dyan ngayon is why are we supporting Ukraine? Why are we supporting Israel?
Yeah.
We need to invest money to protect yung southern border nila to Mexico because of illegal migration. So that's a partisan debate. That's
So some Republicans are saying we should also focus on China in the Pacific and Asia because that's the real deal. That's also, I mean, I had, for instance, Elbridge Colby, who was the architect, on my show before, and he's the guy who's saying we should focus on China. China is really the major concern and threat to the United States.
Yeah, I agree with you. I also read your tweets ni Elbridge Colby.
Yeah.
Colby would be the right person. The Republicans are in power. So they're Democrats are the one in power. So it's basically a voice in the wilderness there in terms of the strategic community in Washington, D.C. But one alternative is if we cannot do it alone and the Americans are distracted. Because we have to accept that they're distracted with other global issues. And we are competing for yung para pansinin tayo. Yeah. And either we get
nasa
a better
linya tayo, nasa linya tayo.
Or we need to we need a better way of packaging ourselves or Southeast Asia.
Sure.
So we need to accept that America is distracted with other issues globally. And as much as they want to focus on East Asia, the dynamics, both the global and the domestic politics are causing them to veer away from this region and focus on China. Okay, so that's one. So ang natin is, hindi naman tayo iiyakan na lang natin yun. We look for alternatives. And I think that means, doon papasok yung we need to diversify our alliances and partnerships. Not only rely on the Americans, but look at other countries, particularly, let's say, Japan or India, or maybe Australia, who are also on the same boat as us. But ang kagandaan nun, they are also part of the barangay. Kasi ang problema sa Amerika, hindi siya member ng barangay natin. America is not a resident power in East Asia. Dumadalaw lang siya. But we're dealing with India or Japan.
They are in Guam. They're in Guam, which is like 4 hours flight from Manila, right? I mean, they have bases in Japan and Korea. I mean, I see what you're saying, but I think we have to be careful about that argument. That's what the Chinese always use. Oh, the Americans are external powers. But last time I checked, Guam, that's an American territory. Puro mga Pinoy pa dyan. I think 50% are Pinoy. A lot of them are fellow Ilocano. So they are a resident power, I would say. They're not an Asian power, but they're in the Pacific power. They are a Pacific power, aren't they?
Well, you're correct there. Ang inano ko lang is because they have other global interests or global commitments.
Absolutely, yeah.
Hindi talaga
overstretched sila.
Even if they want to. Hindi talaga. And that's why one of the drivers of instability in the region is yung what I call the regional naval balance of power. Yung China is able to concentrate its forces dito sa
Yeah,
East.
exactly. Yeah.
But America's different various naval fleets that deployed everywhere. But yung barko that is yung laman ng fleets na yon, they just shift from one fleet to another. So as much as they have the 7th fleet here, hindi rin siya makakoncentrate lang dito sa region.
True. No, that's a good point. Kaya nga sabi ko, we have to be also careful with this propaganda na, oh, US has the biggest defense budget in the world, blah, blah, blah. They're really... And I said, but US is a global power. They have to, slice the pie between how many, oceans, while China is still primarily an Asian power. And then to a certain degree, they're expanding their tentacles, Djibouti here and there, diba? So totally different situations. Not to mention, of course, if you use proper economic measures like purchasing power parity, China's defense budget may be close to 600 billion, right? Assuming we're even counting the real budget, ang dami mga hindi dinideclare. So this is very correct that the Chinese, they can concentrate themselves as a regional power dito sa theater, while the United States, as of now, may not be in that position. And actually, there was just a research that came out from the Congressional Research Services that shows that the U.S. at best can fight, 1.5 major conflicts simultaneously, like barely 2, right? And I'm already looking at the map, and it's like 1 in Ukraine, 1 in the Middle East right now, because you have also, I'm not talking about Hamas, and I'm talking about other major regional powers there, and Russia and China also have an interest there. And then here, China. So they're talking about 3 theaters of potential conflict, right, in the near future. So that's why we're having this conversation. But then again, I mean, Admiral, I understand your caveats and your efforts to, I don't know, how should I put it, to help us to have reasonable expectations about things. It's 11:30 p.m. I'm not at my sharpest, but I hope I'm making sense here. Ang tanong ko lang dito is, ano yung baseline dapat natin with the United States? And I think this is my segue to the last part of our conversation, at least for today, and hopefully we'll have more of this. Because as we speak, the Americans are seeking for more access to Batanes, more of our northern bases. My understanding is that some of the bases in the north may be HADR supposedly, but there are also facilities there to accommodate fighter jets. I mean, we have some very precious things that are on the table right now, which Marcos Jr. has not fully green-lighted. So my understanding is that, even between allies, there has to be some sort of reciprocity, right? I mean, definitely between allies. As we allow the Americans to have more presence in the north vis-a-vis Taiwan, that's a very risky thing for us. And I understand why BBM is very equivocal about it, just to be nice, strategic ambiguity, if I can put it that way. What is your take on that? I mean, what should be the baseline from the U.S.? I completely agree that we should not rely on America. But at the end of the day, Admiral, iba yung treaty ally eh. Iba yung, partner, strategic partner. I mean, whatever you want to call them, comprehensive strategic partner, right? All of these terminologies that Vietnam has for different countries, right? Iba pa rin yung treaty ally eh. It's at a totally different level, right? So, what should be the baseline expectation we should develop vis-a-vis, what is the thing that our envoys here should negotiate for, our ambassadors? I mean, let's say, bukas tayo nag-replace kay, hindi, mahal natin si Ambassador Romualdez, but let's just say, in theory, you and I became the ambassador tomorrow here. Anong mga baselines na dapat i-target natin to get out of our alliance in a reasonable way that is actually also good? I mean, because U.S. security is also tethered to our security. So if we're not secure, we cannot defend ourselves. Problema din sa kanila yan. So I'm just wondering, what should be the baseline there in terms of the Philippine-U.S. alliance?
Okay, a problem, Richard, with the baseline is the baseline is defined by yung politics natin, domestic politics. If it's only purely on military strategic conversation, madali ilatag yun. Kasi it's just, ililista mo yung capabilities mo, ililista mo yung requirements mo. So, when we define the alliance, the Philippine-US alliance, in terms of a corporate relation, ano yung equity ng partners eh? Ang equity ng US is yung capabilities niya eh.
Yeah.
Ang equity natin dito is real estate. Basically, it's real estate.
Yeah.
Now, ang question dito is, in terms of the baseline, how much of the real estate are we willing to partake as part of the relation of the engagement. And at what level of control do we allow yung real estate natin gamitin? So
access, yeah.
Oh, kasi let's say ideal muna. The ideal is yung facilities natin can accommodate the forces at any given time. Okay? They can surge their forces within the Philippine archipelago let's say X number of days from the time na merong warning order. So that's yung ano mo. And when you say accommodate, that means pag latag nila dito, we can house them, we can safely house them, and they are able to conduct multi-domain operations after they've arrived here X number of days, or Y number of days. Parang ganon. Then, of course, yung location ng real estate. Kasi real estates are important because they should be able to influence yung area that they were situated in. For example, if you're looking at Batanes, that means whatever is situated there, whatever is deployed there, it can influence Pasig Channel Zone Strait and radiate outwards to South China Sea and the Mid-Pacific. Okay. So yun yung doon, calculation.
Right.
So again, it depends Kasi if let's say for example, yung scenario na controversial, something happens in Taiwan and the Americans ask us, can we use your bases to help Taiwan? Our answer would be a political answer kasi that would be based on the discernment ng Commander-in-Chief or the President. Iwi-weigh niya yung papayag ba ako o hindi. And it's not a clean solution kasi merong automatic na negative implications.
Yeah.
So again, yung baseline mo would be dependent on how yung political appreciation ng Commander-in-Chief. And it can move left or right depending sa situation.
You're being very diplomatic about this. I mean, I'm asking you as a former military guy. I mean, what is okay? I understand. There's the politics of it. There's the operational military aspect of it. But what is the marriage of the two? Like, what is if we split the difference? Let's say a realistic level of political calculations and discussion, and then a reasonable level of military capability development. Kasi ayaw naman natin forever na hanggang real estate na lang asset tayo. We want to also be a capable ally and partner which can also actively contribute to international peace and security, right? At least in our immediate region, anti-piracy, counter-terrorism, etc. Not just in Mindanao, but beyond, diba? I mean, the U.S. has an interest in developing the capability of allies like the Philippines do, so that we can contribute to an international system that is more stable down the road.
Okay, in that terms, if you notice yung bilateral security dialogue, yung readout niya, 50% is on security and 50% is on economy. Right. The reason being, I think, dito is, babalik tayo sa conversation on industrialization. Kasi the only way we can sustainably be able to work with under an alliance framework is if we capacitate ourselves. Hindi yung dependent.
Right. Hindi
yung mendicant yung approach mo dun sa relationship or transactional. Okay. It should be, at some point, kaya nating i-defend yung sarili natin with their help, but nakapacitate na sa sarili natin. So, baseline doon is they need to help us develop our capabilities. Not just get yung buying from them equipment. Okay. Kasi that's a business relationship, not an alliance relationship.
Right.
Okay. And of course, mahal yung equipment nila Kaya nga we're buying from other countries which is much cheaper. Okay. So yun. We mentioned about drones, technology transfer. And siguro making the Philippines part of their military supply chain para we can draw on the same supply. Kasi meron namang basic yan. There are basic equipment or simple equipment that can be common to us.
Right. Okay. Not reasonable. Yeah, we're towards the the last part of this episode, but before, because I want you also to remind yung ating mga kababayan bakit mahalaga ito. Pero I want you to also remind siguro yung mga Filipino-American community how they can be helpful here, di ba? Kasi as we speak, one reason why certain countries get billions of dollars of aid, even if they're developed and rich and all of that, is because there's a lobby. There's a powerful lobby that pushes for stronger bilateral security cooperations. The latest one is actually Indians. The Indian community, the Indian American community is very, very proactive, no? And that has been very consequential in terms of elevating the bilateral relationship between India and US. And India is not even an ally of the US, right? And they're getting access to, an Airbus engine development capabilities, so on and so on. But before that, itong Taiwan, can we go back to this issue of Taiwan, because your take on the Taiwan issue is quite unique. In fact, I would say that perhaps we're hindi naman opposite, but I argued in certain articles that and certain interviews that we could leverage the Taiwan linkage by, essentially making clear to the Chinese that the more they bully us in West Philippine Sea, the more we give access to the Americans. But it could also work the other way. We can curb the American access in the north if in exchange in the west the Chinese don't make extra trouble. I mean, how do you stand on that linkage kind of game or calculus? Or do you think we should just push back on both fronts and there should be no compromise? Or, I think if I remember, maybe the Taiwan issue is even more important at some point, because we're talking about a giant island next to it, not just small islands here. I think that's where you have some interesting take that I want to go back to.
Okay, ang best case scenario ko sa Taiwan is status quo. Meaning, it is what is now. Minus, of course, yung tension in the Taiwan Strait. Okay. So, that's my best case scenario. My worst case scenario is Chinese presence in Taiwan. Kasi now, Taiwan is essentially buffer state natin sa China.
Right.
So if we lose Taiwan, then kapitbahay na natin si China. And our the northern part of the Philippines will be under threat. It will be under threat kasi Basi Channel is a strategic waterway. Okay. And yung discernment natin dito started when China during the previous administration was trying to invest in those certain areas in the northern Philippines.
Yeah.
Na kami naman sa Navy nakita namin, strategic yung niyan, yung placement niya. Red flag yan, hindi tayo magsasalita. Kasi if they gain access to that, whether that is pseudo foreign direct investment or whatever.
Tourism naman daw, papagandahin nila, gawa daw sila ng casino.
that will give them a footprint doon sa ating, right. So medyo, nung nakita natin, ito na biro ko dyan for yung those arguing against EDCA. Sabi ko, may EDCA rin yung China. Ang tawag nila ron, BRI. So, the point is, we cannot afford a Taiwan that is may Chinese presence. Okay. So, anything that disrupts yung strategy nila on Taiwan, that involves Basi Channel or Zone 3, I'm all for it. So, if you do not want the Americans there, kasi that might be a driver for further conflict, the minimum we can do is deploy our own forces there and strengthen our position. Okay? And we can always claim naman na we have our own agency. Yung China, even if you claim na we are a US puppet, that is our territory. Responsible kami dyan. And we will protect that against you and even from the US. Just to make sure that it's peaceful.
Right.
Okay? So that's the minimum that we do.
And last one, thank you very much for that. Last one, do you have some sort of, just dun sa mga ating mga kababayan na siguro hindi nila na-appreciate, kasi I got a lot of bashing online dun some of the articles I wrote about itong 36 billion pesos. Siyempre, hindi nila binasa. Obviously, na this is over 10 years as a share of GDP. It's actually not that much. I mean, when you compare to the Philippines to a lot of our neighbors, we're way behind the curve, right? So for a GDP of almost $500 billion, half a trillion, spending 36 billion over 10 years, considering the threat we're facing, considering how far we have to catch up with things, not only with China, but even also with some of our peers in the region, I mean, I think I'm already answering the question, but I want it from you, Admiral, someone who served in the Navy, whose family has served in the Navy for a long time, more than what, half a century, yung buong family involved dito sa aviation. Can you just remind yung mga kababayan natin bakit mahalaga itong modernization now? And I know the context of our conversation because, you know, I'm sure you've heard even some people, including my guests, you know, some of them were skeptical. Some of them were like, I'm not sure you want to spend that much, right? Baka naman email diffic lang ito or maging white elephant projects to or baka
pupunta sa education, sa health,
sure.
Anything that would be good for the people. No? But we are not living a perfect ideal world. We are living in a very competitive region sa East Asia. And we have seen the result of yung vacillation or yung pagdadalawang isip natin in investing for our own defense. Ano yun? Scarborough. Party profile.
Yeah.
Okay. Kung hindi perfect yung neighborhood mo, then it is your responsibility to protect yourself.
Right.
Now, yung cost niyan is something that is ano yung cost nun pag if we do that, then we are surrendering yung country natin to yung whims and caprices of a third country. Who has ambitions in the region. Hindi naman tayo, Pilipino tayo, and our history is replete with lessons of Filipinos fighting for our own freedom and fighting for our own rights as citizens. So, I think, yung county lang yun compared to, yung counting investment na yun,
exactly.
I think quite is.
Right. I mean, we're not even spending 1.5% of our GDP, right? I mean, countries like US are spending, 3 to 4%. Russia is spending more than 4%. China is spending definitely more than 2%. I mean, we're like spending at EU level, but you know, it's like, but we don't have...
What point something?
Yeah, I mean, and considering we're starting from a very low base and we're up against China. I mean, this is serious stuff. And hindi naman pwede na parati tayo umaasa na lang sa America as we discuss. Hindi naman pwede na magtatay digong style naman tayo na wala tayong makagawa at magje-jet ski na lang tayo. So, you know, we have to find a reasonable way of dealing with this. And hindi tayo siseryoso na ibang bansa kung wala kang matinong, you know, modern, di ba, military or armed forces. And as we discussed with si Mike Loico, among others from AFP, Colonel Loico, you know, we want to have a kind of a 21st century modern armed forces. Not the best in the world, but at least a modern, capable one. What about some Filipino-American community? Is there an advice that maybe they should be more involved in pushing for more American support for the Philippines modernization? Siguro yung mga F-16 fighters, gawin nila mas mura, mas affordable, napakamahal yung binibenta nila sa atin, ituloy na punta tayo sa Sweden. Anong masasabi natin dyan?
Well, siguro, keep the fire burning in terms of yung visibility ng Pilipinas sa kasi ang larangan kasi diyan domestic politics yung so be a constant voice of reminding your congressmen or senators to look after the Southeast Asia and the Philippines.
Right. On that note, thank you very much, Admiral Ong, Professor Ong, from Ateneo de Manila University. ASOG, diba? School of Government po. Professor Ong, Professor of Practice at the Ateneo School of Government. Thank you so much for that discussion. I think we went a little bit into logistics. That's, I think, what real experts do. Amateurs do more like, you know, grand strategy. So I think people would appreciate that, Admiral Ong. Admiral, are there certain articles, I mean, of course, I know, but, you know, for the purpose of audience, that you want people to check, especially your thoughts on asymmetric warfare, etc. Things na siguro mas maganda kung binasa niyo yung mga sinulat na available to the public for free, of course. Are there certain things that you want to flag there for people to check? Yeah.
I'm still writing one on curiously, it's archipelagic strategy. So hintayin nyo na lang.
And of course, some of your pieces on thought leaders on Rappler, right, among others, has touched on these issues. So I really suggest guys to check that. Not to mention also, if you go to this YouTube and just put Hey Darian and Admiral Ong, some of our previous conversations comes in First Island Chain, Second Island Chain, some of the more other issues that hindi namin inulit dito. So you can check them out. But I look forward, Admiral, to catching up with you, perhaps at a better time as far as my time is concerned. Maraming salamat, Admiral, for putting aside precious time from your weekend and morning with us. I can see a lot of people showing a lot of appreciation dito sa ganitong discussion. So, hindi ito kasing kalog ng mga iba, like yung usapan namin ni Ronald Llamas. Hindi ito mga usapan glutathione or usapan kalokohan. This is serious stuff. This is matters of war and peace, right? It gets grim, but thank you so much, Admiral, for making it as accessible and as authoritative as it should be. Kasi ayoko yung mga pa-amateur discussions lang. So, thank you so much, Admiral, and hope to have you again with us for more discussions. Baka gusto mo rin usapan glutathione and all of that.
Pwede naman.
Exactly.
Pag-research mo na.
Yun nga baka magpa-drip muna daw si Admiral, and then pag-usapan natin ng skincare. On that note, God bless and talk to you soon. Mabuhay po, Admiral.
Good night.
Good night po. Good day po. Alright guys, thank you so much dun sa mga ayan, usapan dito tayo. Ayan tayo Kailangan talaga natin ng Kailangan talaga natin ng isang episode. Hindi, in fairness naman, aminin ko, dumaan ako sa Shiseido nung nandun ako sa Ginza sa Tokyo the other week. So baka I'll make a vlog about that kasi I know medyo mahal ang Shiseido, pero for guys kasi guys, and yung mga babae kasi, 'di ba? You have all of this. Ako kasi wala akong time. So I really suggest kung lalaki Shiseido kasi isa lang, it covers everything, right? Andun yung moisturizer, andun yung anti-aging, anti-wrinkle, whatever. But I found a more affordable also version na nabili ko sa Singapore last year na naka-sale ako 30%. So you get 3 times the volume of the Shiseido. Maybe not exactly the same quality but the American brands. So pero hindi natin pag-usapan yan, guys. Kaya huwag na kayo mag-glutathione. Natural skincare and all of that. And yes, pahinga rin kayo. On that note, thank you very much, guys. Let's see kung makatulog ako ng maaga. Baka mahabol pa natin before end of Saturday nyo. Kasi alam niyo naman, Sundays or Sunday nyo, I want to Sabbath day na yan. And of course, I have my own things to do here. Pero try natin siguro in 12 hours or less than 12 hours or so. If we can do one more, balikan natin itong usapan glutathione, usapan anong latest kay ibang klase talaga itong number 1 senator ng bayan. Alright? And then of course, next week, God willing, as always, inshallah, pag-usapan naman natin ang R&R, baka naman may SNR na rin, tignan natin. Kaya nga, itag niya rin si Sir Sunny, si Senator Trillanes. Baka ito nang gagawin natin, SNR, R&R, SNR, SNRR. Yan, lahat yung gagawin natin. Because we want to have more discussions. Things are moving, as you can see in our previous vlog, diba? Pinag-usapan natin, the opposition is finally getting the ball rolling. Alright, so that's very good. That's very nice. Alright, and yes, lighting din. Nice and lighting. Sunblock, yes. Kailangan, ito yung advice ko dun sa iba. Yung syempre, sasabihin na iba, hindi naman ako maputi or hindi naman ako ganyan. Hindi ko kailangan ng sunblock. Well, guys, it's not about being maputi and all of that. It's also about protecting your skin. Kasi kung puro kayong sunlight, lalo mag-wrinkle kayo dyan. Baka wala pa kayong anong edad, na. Alright? May size na kayo dyan. On that note, thank you very much and take care of yourself. Mag-beauty sleep na tayo. Alright? Ayan na. Okay, mag-beauty sleep na tayo. Thank you